Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Sarah Christensen with One Sage's View Astrology, and today I'm going to focus on Bridgerton, the series itself. We're going to look at season 1 and all of the archetypes that are present in the astrology for that original release date. And it'll give us some information about the cast ensemble, the themes of the first show, but it'll also have buried in the details of the chart the subsequent seasons, and we'll take a look of that, those threads that go through time, and from 2020 to 2026, because this was the year that season 4 released. So we have like a nice detail of kind of the evolution of the show Bridgerton across all these seasons. So it'll be fun to look at that, and we're going to take a look at season 1, and then in the subsequent videos we'll do season 2, season 3, part 1 and part 2, and season 4, part 1 and part 2. So we're going to focus on that, and I hope in exploring these themes you'll get insight to how a project, a production, anything that is produced and has release date is kind of like the birth of something. So we're going to take a look at that and have the opportunity to see the archetypes and how they move through time and what that means for the cast ensemble, those who are producing the show, the writers, the creators of all the amazing costumes and these kinds of things, to the music. It's all in there in the astrology chart. But also the audience, those who picked it up, and what different seasons meant in terms of the time that it was picked up and the time that it was released, changes that were made, and how that might have been received. These will be all kind of themes that are present in the astrology. So I'm excited to take a look at it and dive into it. So grab your tea and let's get started on exploring the astrology and what it can tell us about Bridgerton. Let's go.
All right, we're going to dive into the season 1 Bridgerton series and explore the themes and the archetypes that give us some hints about what that season itself will be. But within that original release date in December of 2020, December 25th, 2020, we'll also see the clues that lead us to the other seasons as well, because you can see the whole within the first original creation. And we'll also see how you can look both ways in time from what will be linked to it in future seasons, but also how it was a leading up to the release as well, because you can see that in the charts as well, because we were all sitting in quarantine in the pandemic during that time when it was release, and also kind of the general population, those who are tuning in to Netflix and watching those things that were produced in 2019 and that came out in the end of the year, and by that time we had been in quarantine for some months. So it'll be interesting to kind of explore to see how that also shows up in that original release date. So let's get started and jump into the details. For season 1, we had Daphne Bridgerton as the focus, and her looking for a match in the marriage mart on the Ton. And this is a scene with her with Simon Bassett, who is the Duke of Hastings. So that's the season 1 focus of this pair, this coupling, and all the story that goes with that, and also the details that will show up about their characters and the theme of that kind of fake dating that was in that season 1. So let's take a look. All right, so diving into the chart, I want to get out my highlighter here so I can highlight a few things for you. So in the season 1, we're looking at the Libra rising, and that is kind of setting the tone for the theme of relationships and the marriage mart. And it also gives the quality of Libra and the relationships, but also within the context of the female gaze is a part of that Bridgerton series, and also how that shows up. What's interesting is the ruler of the ascendant is Venus, and Venus is in Sagittarius here in the 3rd house, and that's the 3rd house of kind of a local community. And the local community here, from the series standpoint, from that season 1, would be the Ton. And so it would be the cast of characters that are the Ton, and Venus is saying that the females are going to be kind of like the focus and also the female gaze. So it's kind of like a multiple layers of the meaning of the symbolism for the kind of what that would be presented to the world. It will be captured by kind of another purpose of the show is also to look at themes of what people's values are. There's also a layer of wealth, because this is the ton. This is those who have money. The Bridgertons have money. They're very wealthy in that era. In this imagination series that we get to see these characters played out, and it will take on that as a container, right? And with that also, we look at the bottom of the chart here is kind of the house of family. And we can see multiple things in the house of family in this chart for season 1 because it speaks to the family of the Bridgertons, because they're kind of the main basis of this. And we can see embedded in here, there is the sun, which will be picked up by the cast ensemble that we know and will have over the duration will be the family of the Bridgertons. So we have the sun. So it's speaking to something about the family. It's highlighted there. The rules are the Capricorn. So the rules that they have to work within in the context of the season 1, where we're introduced to these ideas, is they have certain rules that they have to play by. Now, we do have the overlay of the diversity that's introduced in the show, kind of letting us explore what if, there was this viewpoint of where all walks of life, all colors included in the mix of what was in the ton, and that gives us the looking at the detail through the lens of Aquarius. So it's like the what if scenario, if this was more, the historical lens to play out this storyline, this imagination, this romantic series is looked at through a different kind of lens, and the different kind of lens is coming from the Aquarian energy of this chart. And we have an important conjunction that sits in the context of Bridgerton season 1, which will play out throughout the seasons. They landed the show on December 25th. So just before that date, we have Saturn and Jupiter making a conjunction in Aquarius. And I think that conjunction was December 17th, if I am correct on the date. So just a couple days before. But what is so important about that is it is the kind of a stake in the ground of a large cycle of Saturn and Jupiter coming together in air signs and starting that in Aquarius. And at the time that the season 1 landed and was released, the general public was in quarantine, and that social distance detail appears also within the context of the rules that we were all forced to work within in the larger context of the public. And basically Netflix audience is we're at home, we're having to social distance. These are the rules that we're having to play by. And also there's something else emerging that is kind of future focused about the symbolism of the diversity that's included in the cast from Shonda and what they wanted to put out. So this is highly creative, but it has a container of having still some, the romantic novel kind of detail, but completely flipped on its head, with the context of a society that looks very different and diverse, and what that holds in that frame for the imagination for it to land in a broad perspective of an audience. So this is a really important component of why Bridgerton itself as a series will have longevity. It's because they have Jupiter expanding the ascendant, because there's air sign and an air sign, one is fixed and one is cardinal, and that you have Saturn that in time it'll be interesting really to explore kind of the legacy that Bridgerton had at this point in time, and also looking back on it 30 years, which is a timeline that I would look for a Saturn cycle, a whole Saturn cycle. Saturn goes around the entire zodiac in 29 years, so you'd want to look back and have a reflection of that. What kind of impact did the show have on the general public, and how we looked at creativity and things that were put on screen, and because it was very different for how it approached the ensemble and completely turned it on its ear in terms of what we could enjoy on the screen, and having so many people enjoy it from all different walks of life. So that is really, really important, because that sets the stage for the age of Aquarius, where things are more inclusive. And that's kind of a key thing about the season 1 in what it's bringing to the larger, it's bringing to the general public, how they might enjoy shows, and especially shows like this. So we probably can't even measure yet how significant Bridgerton season 1 in what it meant for the general public and the creative arts, probably for another 14 years, because from 14 years from 2020, because that will give us the point of the fullness of a half cycle of Saturn. So it'd be super interesting to see that in probably, I think it would be 14 years would be 2034, I believe. So in a few years, but it's, at that point, we'll probably be through the other seasons. Most of them, maybe there might be one more after that, but I don't know if they do additional spin-offs. But what we can see here is that longevity is the seed, and that it's going to have an impact on the way people look at inclusivity and these kinds of themes, because it's embedded in the seed. Another thing that season 1 gives us is this detail of the nodes. And I wanted to focus on nodes because the nodal structure of anything is very important. It's kind of like the evolutionary kind of impact, but also the themes of the show and how it will be portrayed by the characters and the cast ensemble. So what we know so far in this particular season 1 chart is that it's a Sagittarius south node. So that brings in the Jupiter. And the Jupiter in Aquarius, from the south node ruler perspective, is speaking to something that is from the past. Definitely the show brings something from the past, because south node would be the past. The Jupiter in Aquarius gives a spin on it because of the inclusivity of it, and it will expand. So it's expanding something about, I think it kind of expands like the missed opportunity the collective may have had without having the diversity in the past. That's an interesting kind of theme to contemplate, even though, this is a creative series, right? So it's taking history and turning it on its head and kind of showing us a mirror of the potentials for different kind of ways things could have unfolded in history. But we don't have, this is a very creative piece of work. So it's interesting to see how they dance between the themes of having the inclusivity, but we still have the structure of kind of a patriarchal type situation with the marriage mart. But then on top of that, we have strong matriarchal energy, because we have Lady Violet Bridgerton, and she's reflected in this in terms of the family. But we have the situation in season 1 where we know that Violet is without her partner, her husband, the Viscount, which is Anthony's father, and kind of we get the background story there about how they're in that moment and without the father figure there, right? So that kind of is what we're given in season 1. And we can see in the base of the chart, we have the Pluto in the Capricorn. And to me, it's kind of like the transformation that happens to the family because of a death. And that's the Pluto. So we have that in the context. So all of the subsequent seasons will have that as an underlying background story. And in season 1, there's it's really focusing on Daphne and the Featherington family as the neighbors, and the play, like introducing us to all the characters. And then we also have the awareness, oh, there's this gossip thing that people are tuning into right out of the gate. And that's embedded in the North Node. And the North Node has Gemini. And Gemini is communications. It can be how people get their information. But it's kind of flipped a bit because we have a Libra rising, and that puts the Gemini in the ninth house. But what's interesting is also that the third house and the ninth house are at 29 degrees of Taurus and Scorpio. So Venus and Mars are the two planets that are responsible for the ninth house and the third house. So it's kind of interesting to have the nodes kind of enclosed inside the ninth and third house. So we have the nodes and Venus and even Juno inside the ninth house, third house. These signs are enclosed. And so they're not getting kind of an attention to the Mercury nor the attention to the Jupiter in the same weight from an evolutionary astrology standpoint. Okay. So if we were to look at Bridgerton as something that is something that we engage with, like a produced thing, it has a release date, right? So it's a production. It has a release date. So it's something that we engage with. It's a piece of art, right? A piece of film, a series that's done. And so we engage with it. And it has this kind of relationship. We'll have a relationship with it based on how we perceive things, how it might change our ideas. We may evolve because of something that we're introduced to. We may ask questions about things in history, or looking at patriarchal and matriarchal kind of scenarios, and also relationships, because this is a show that's based on the female gaze and how that will translate to the audience in what they pick up and how they might look at something. So the North Node being in the ninth house, in the sun, the ninth house is about long distance, foreign things, long distance travel, foreign things, higher education, but also it's the access to divinity through religion of sorts. But we'll also look at ninth house as a house for litigators, these kinds of things. And also we could also say that astrology is eighth house, ninth house, because later on in the seasons you'll see that emerge. And I also think that the third house is important because of the community, the local community of Mayfair, the Ton, and the communication and the perception. These are kind of interesting how they're positioned in the chart and what we might glean from them. Mercury, being the North Node ruler, is down here in the fourth house. And so to me, it's an important planet to consider for the container is communicating something in maybe a traditional scope, but also with the image of something that's not traditional in terms of the diverse cast and the diverse way that the Ton looks. So there's this kind of play between the two, and you'll see that, right, in terms of we have a diverse ensemble, and we have the queen instead of the king is not available, so it's the queen who is holding court in this series. And so this is going to be interesting how it also plays out in the other seasons. But Mercury is important because it's the North Node, and it tells us more about the storyline. It tells us about Bridgerton from what the family has in its context that we're introduced to, but then that we also get introduced to in other seasons, because we'll see the evolution of the characters. So the Mercury is very important. So it's kind of that communication, how people receive information, how they engage with it, and because of the gossip and what is presented through the character of Lady Whistledown in the beginning. So we don't know the context, the deeper context of the Lady Whistledown at this point in season 1, but it's there. What I liked about seeing the Mercury down here is she's hidden at first, right? But what's really interesting to me is that we understand now through the course of time and watching the series that it took a couple of seasons for us to be introduced to the mystery of who is Lady Whistledown, right? And in the chart of the original release date, we have the sun at basically 3 degrees and 59 minutes. So basically 4 degrees, right? And that the Mercury is 6 degrees, 57 minutes, which is basically 7 degrees. So we have this 3-degree separation, right, between the sun and Mercury. Because when the sun arcs to the Mercury by solar arc, we have a 3-year span of time. And within 3 years, we are not yet aware, but it is being filmed of that kind of revelation. So season 3 would be the revelation of who is Lady Whistledown. So it's kind of embedded in this particular chart from season 1. But we'll have an evolution because once that sun is going to connect with the Mercury, then it is leaning into the North Node, again with the sun highlighting it. And with that comes the decision from the executives of Netflix to split it into 2 parts so they can have a release date for part 1, part 2 in season 3. So even in the original season 1 release date, we can see the future ripple of energy that's going to put that into 2 parts. And then they'll go from that because it enables them to have a longer time to release. And other shows will probably follow this. I know that maybe Bridgerton was one of the first shows that they did the part 1, part 2, but other shows have followed suit because of what it enables them to do in viewership numbers and also how they can spread it out and the marketing that goes with it because they can do additional marketing as well. Okay. Also, it speaks to another thing that speaks to is the 9th house. 9th house is also the house for foreign language. So when we see in season 1, we see the travels introduced, like Colin, I think is going on his travels, and at the end of that, I believe. And also, I think Marina Thompson comes from the country into the Ton through the Featherington. Who played Mr. Featherington? He was his Archibald. So because of his bets, so Marina is brought in to the Ton, and she's kind of adding an element to the Featherington family. So that also speaks to that relationship of the father figure, and he's having to bring her in and take care of her coming out in society. And that is, adding to the mix of the theme in the season 1, the competition and what Penelope as a neighbor. And Penelope is the neighbor, and the neighbor so Penelope is showing up here in the chart. But you could also say that Daphne, as the main co-lead of season 1, is also visible of the Venus. So you can see it in layers because first we see Daphne as the character. She is the daughter. So she's bound by the Saturn because she's in the 4th house. But I also think there's a layer of the Venus in Sagittarius speaking to her horsemanship because she definitely is riding a horse. Daphne is riding a horse in season 1 multiple times. But also we can see the overlay of Penelope Bridgerton, the Featherington family, as the neighbors also. And I think the Featheringtons are the very first scene where we see Penelope and Prudence and Philippa as Prudence is getting, put into the corset. So you can see the layers of each of the characters kind of in that first visual that we're given, but also how it plays in season 1. Because the Venus in Sagittarius is speaking to the neighbor, something about the females in the community, because 3rd house is like your local community, so the local ton, and the young women who are presenting themselves into the marriage mart. So that is, and it's offering us insight also by the South Node that is ruled by Jupiter, because that's a South Node in Sagittarius, that they may have like the idea of freedom that might come from the connection of being married, but there's so many rules because the Jupiter is in the context of a Saturn sign through the Aquarius. So there's this certain rules to play. And also we can see that the South Node as so close to the Venus, and Venus is the ascendant ruler. So the whole mask of the show, now we can see a bit of something about season 4 emerging within this nodal context. So one of the main themes of season 4, of course, is classism. And we can see also the presentation of Libra is the presentation of exactly what is supposed to be worn for the marriage mart in terms of the gowns when they all go to the modiste, and this is in here, but it's kind of giving that perspective of the structure, but also something of they want the freedoms, but those freedoms only come through the marriage mart. They have to go that path. I think we're introduced to also each of the siblings a little bit in season 1 in terms of what they kind of size themselves up for what they present into that in terms of the character that Daphne Bridgerton is playing and how she is prepared for this her whole life, and then things start going awry. But also we can see that thread towards season 4 in this snapshot of the Venus so close to the South Node because of its 12 degrees of Sagittarius to the 19 degrees of the South Node. And that is playing out in a way that kind of shows that sometimes there is the movement of into the country and city to country. City is more Gemini, country and wild is more Sagittarius. So there's something about that embedded in here as well. And also I think in season 4, we have the insight that there's the potential of Sophie's character to head to the Americas. But there was also, I think in season 2, I believe it was season 2, that cousin Jack came from the Americas and had something like around the theme for season 2. So there's this kind of like play between faraway places and what is in the local ton and then what comes into the local ton. So that's kind of the interplay and intermix between them. So we can see the threads there. And also we see with that third house perspective with the Sagittarius there, that when they come into the ton or are introduced into the ton, we also have the Sharma family from season 2 as well that come from a distance and are participating in the marriage ton for, I believe it is Edwina, who's going to be the one that they put forward for the marriage mart, but in the end, it's Kate in season 2. So that is also, they're coming from a distance, so, and introduced. So we can see these themes. Another theme that shows up, I think, in season 4 with this Sagittarius and the Gemini is in the nodal structure is the foreign language that comes up in season 4. So we can see that from the French that Benedict Bridgerton struggles with, but, which is hilarious because Luke Thompson actually speaks French. So, and but that's interesting. So that we do see. It's kind of interesting to see all of the components of the landscape of the ton itself, where people are coming in from other places that are introduced to others and how they show up. And the next season, if we're looking at Eloise's character, Eloise Bridgerton, and I've kind of just started dabbling into that book. I haven't read the whole thing, just started listening. But we were introduced to the character that Eloise will connect with in the next season, I believe. I believe it's going to be season 5 with Eloise. I could be surprised. It could be the Francesca character and Michaela. But either way, they're going to weave the two into the next season, whichever way it goes. So that's going to be interesting. But the arcing of when we get the reveal of Lady Whistledown, that's in the season 1 point of view. And also when we see the theme of the fake dating concept is as the introduction, that to me is the Libra rising. And there's something that's interesting on the other side of the chart here as like a component of a theme that is the tension of what the young women are, having to live up to in terms of posture, etiquette, these kinds of things, what they wear, how they behave, how they look, all of it as they approach the marriage mart. And on the other side of the chart, we see Chiron in Aries. Chiron in Aries at 4 degrees with the vertex right next to it. And Chiron in Aries is, the theme of Chiron in Aries is really focused in on, I have a right to exist as I am in the world. And you can see the tension from the very first show, but it will be a tension throughout in how do I get to express myself and be myself in who I am with the person I will partner up with in the context of the show, right? So this is a theme that will be picked up by people who are watching, people who are participating in the art, and give some great themes for people to contemplate, right? And how much of your true self gets to shine through in who you're partnering up with. And when does that really emerge? Because, of course, the shows make it very interesting in how they write the scripts, how it all plays out, and how that emerges in, how it's all tidied up with a bow at the end, right? Or a veil. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to see that in the season 1 release. Now, to think about some of the other storyline that was introduced in season 1, or it's in the context, I don't know when they did the flashback. I think they did it in season 2. I'm not sure if they did a lengthy flashback of the Viscount Bridgerton, Lady Violet Bridgerton's husband. Can't remember the name of his character at this moment, but the introduction of the fact that he was stung by a bee when he was coming back from a hunting trip with young Anthony, because he was like, I think 18-ish at the time in the show for that particular event, in that backstory. That backstory of the father figure passing is right here. And it's also embedded in that he's stung by a bee. So he's stung by a bee in the neck. Neck is Taurus. So, but it's the sting at first, but then he passes. And this is a Mars at the very end of the 7th house. And we see that kind of replicated in season 2, where Anthony has that fear because he witnessed his father, suffering from the effects of the bee sting. And then, the conclusion of that, his father's death, which then thrust him into the Viscount position in that particular storyline. So the Mars in Aries gives us that kind of the stinger, but it also gives us courage, and it gives us the perspective of the action that the other takes because of the reflective mirror that is played out between the female co-lead and the partner. So in season 1, it would be Daphne as the co-lead from the Bridgerton kind of baseline Bridgerton sibling who's on the marriage mart and active in seeking the future partner, future marriage partner, future husband. So that gives us kind of that as well. We also can see the Aries Mars energy through Simon Bassett's character in Mr. Gloves. He's the boxer, right? And Mondrich is the actual boxer. So we have not only Mondrich, but also Simon, who's his friend, who is often in the ring with him. And even when Anthony goes in himself. But it's kind of fun to see kind of that energy portrayed in kind of the other side of the chart, because it's a tension that's created to have the Mars on the other side. It's the courage, the action. So even when it's a flipped scenario and we have the Bridgerton young men pursue, and it flips it on the head as the Bridgerton counterpart as the male figure, but it's still a female gaze, because the whole show is based on the female gaze. That's why it's a Libra rising as well. And the context of the action that's taken from the feminine counterpart. So if you look at, say, season 2, because this is where we first get a picture of a Bridgerton, which is Anthony, the Viscount in this case, going on the marriage mart, pursuing Edwina. But then the one that is a better match has higher energy. She's more athletic. She's more well-rounded in Kate Sharma. And that is also Aries, the Mars Aries. She's a very, I guess, the way she handles the action in her role for Kate Sharma. So it's kind of interesting to look at that as well. But also in season 2, it's also imprinted within season 1 is the sister component. So the 2 sisters and how that is languaged out through the nodes and having that tied to the Gemini, the 2 sisters coming from abroad. That's also interesting. So I was kind of stunned about how many things I kept seeing in the season 1 chart and how it's still playing out. And it's a ripple kind of through time to see how that's imprinted in the original. Another thing about, let's say if we were to look at Lady Violet Bridgerton's husband who passed, this is also with the Uranus here in the Taurus. It also speaks to the bee sting. But there's also something that is visible in season 2 around the whole scheme that Jack is playing with Lady Featherington Portia and the money and the worthless mines in America. And that's also the Taurus and kind of the Taurus and Scorpio energy, because the mines would be like the Scorpio and the potential for, but that's like the con. The con shows up more in how that gets played out as a trickster energy within that context. So that's kind of interesting how that season 2 theme also pulls out from this chart. Another thing that is in season 1 between Duke of Hastings and his father, you can also see that in the context of Simon Bassett has no desire to have a legacy. He doesn't want to be married. So it's kind of like the thing that draws on the storyline. And that is like the first kind of impulse, first kind of imprint of the archetype of that co-lead is not seeking a family, and that's kind of he's holding himself back from, so he's like socially distancing himself from the marriage mark to a degree before he does the fake dating thing, but he thinks he's like solving his problem. He's just making it bigger. But the theme about him not wanting to have children because of his father, and so that also is a Saturn kind of restricting the self or restricting for the children kind of context. But in the end, because of this detail of it being enshrined to the first house Libra, it's going to happen. That's open. That's like an open gates for the potential, once the co-lead of season 1, which is Daphne Bridgerton, figuring things out by asking and figuring it out by asking. I think she asks her lady's maid, right? So she gets the truth. Sagittarius goes and asks the direct question. So I love it. It's all in here. It's so fascinating to see the overlay, the themes, what gets written, what is played out, and how it shows up in the chart. And this is just the first chart, right? But it's fun to see all of the threads that can be pulled based on future seasons. And I hope you're enjoying that as much as I am, because it's really fascinating, right? Like how you can look at it. Another thing that's embedded just from the audience, like how we are as a collective and what we're working through that year in 2020 is the Pluto at Capricorn at 23 degrees 58 minutes, almost 24 degrees. Basically, the pandemic kind of landed in the early part of 2020. And the lineup of planets in Capricorn is really when that started. And I think the planets that were lined up, including, so it was Saturn, Jupiter, Mercury, I think Ceres was in there, Pallas Athena might have been in there, because Pallas Athena is right there, connected in the 22 degrees of Capricorn. So Pluto is still kind of registering that energy for us to understand we're kind of locked at home and we're in quarantine. It's kind of like we're bound by these restrictions. What is interesting about that reflective is, 7 years from now, then 14 years out from when the show launched, and even, 29, 30 years in the future from 2020, like having a look back at the energy and the archetypes and what it tells about the collective experience at that time and the ripple effect through time about that time that we were contained like that, and how important creativity and the arts are, because at the time we had what was produced in 2019 or maybe even produced in 2018 that was flowing out into 2020 for what we would receive and be able to watch. And then once they finally were able to do productions again in 2021, very limited and very controlled with the masking and these kinds of things and social distance, and that definitely had an impact on season 2 in what they would present for some of the dance scenes and things like that, and even the Bridgerton family gathering together because nobody's coming to their ball. That's part of the impact of the COVID situation, the pandemic, and the quarantines that were in place. That's all embedded in this chart, with the Pluto in the Capricorn and then the Saturn and Jupiter in Aquarius, and including Pallas Athena. So all of this is like really interesting to explore. We can also see some other things that I think should be called out for. Another one was it Brubeck? Brubeck in his character. He was such a gnarly character that Daphne had to face off with. Doing her own little boxing. There's the Mars again, little moment, and how that shows up because of that interaction, the conflict that the Duke of Hastings deals with him. Anthony Bridgerton deals with him as well. So that is also kind of the Mars in Aries, but it also is the confrontation between the expectation of Brubeck from a family like lineage expectation and, what has, been granted to him by Anthony kind of at first, but then pulled back, is this square to Pluto. And that is that kind of patriarchal expectation of I have my right to this, but then it all goes haywire, right? And, we get to see the different punches that are laid, and that's another Mars in Aries in that first season. So there's that as well to note that that's in the tension of the chart by what the family will stand up for, or what the co-lead Duke has to face off with as well, because he's making choices based off of his own legacy, which is that confrontation with the father, which is also something that you can see within that square, and what he will or will not do based on his father's in his experience with his own father, Duke of Hastings, Simon Bassett's character. So it's all present, and it comes in layers, so you have to pull to get the layers, but it's kind of interesting to see all of that. One more thing also is that season 3 and how huge it went with, I guess it would be obsessive is a good adjective about that season 3, because of the sensuality that kind of goes off. Season 1 was off the charts and in a big way. So we have that detail between Daphne and Simon once that opens up in their married life. But we have this kind of interesting evolution over time in each season because of, there's one context in season 1 is she's liberated by being married, but then she's sad because she thinks she might not have children, and that's in there. But there's also the season 2 where the Kate Sharma has an experience with Anthony, and then she feels like a shame. It carries in a theme at some point in the storyline. But then in season 3, it's like Penelope is making choices, but then is liberated also in a moment in a carriage. And that is kind of that sensuality of Taurus showing through, but also kind of just Scorpio and the Bridgerton or the co-lead pursuing. So we see that, but in season 3, there's like this next level arc that the storyline takes because of what's landing in season 3. And in that arc to season 3, it lands, several planets land right where the lot of fortune is. And so it's emphasizing something about the sensuality and the freedom, the liberation that comes. And we see that in the main character, Penelope Bridgerton, of that season 3. So it's in the threads and how the female characters will be able to express themselves in a new way. So it's a lovely thing about the diversity and inclusivity of the kind of cast that we get across all the seasons of Bridgerton, but it's also what they show as a liberated woman when they're coupled up. So not the historical, facts of what actually happened during, the 1800s marriage mart, So it's lovely to see the creativity, the imagination for this romantic storyline. So that's fun to look at. But the Lot of Fortune definitely gets the extra energy of Uranus and Jupiter in season 3 when that launched. And that was why it went so off the charts for so many people. And also positively, I guess, in terms of how people picked it up and replayed and replayed and replayed. But also, that was like a moment that it went beyond the Bridgerton audience and out into other shows where the carriage ended up in other shows. I think it was a carriage in Emily in Paris, I think. So it definitely made a mark on the general audience and what people were adoring about Bridgerton. So that Lot of Fortune kind of oozed out during season 3 and definitely amplified the lusty, the sensual nature for sure. So that is a lot of what I picked up so far in season 1. Another thing that I haven't pointed out yet, but I think it's important to point out, is in the base of the show, we have Neptune. Neptune at 18 degrees of Pisces is very key here because it is the work and craftsmanship that goes into the show to make it have all the details, but it's more like it's so highly imaginative that it would create, what to create. It's just this incredible imagination place to play in the arts and what kind of skilled craftsman goes into that. And so I kind of look at the Neptune in the 6th house for that, how it serves the public in a bigger way, how it serves the collective in a bigger way. The show itself is an ensemble that's very Aquarian. People get to be individuals, how they, might relate to characters, and the details that are given to each of the characters, like the costumes, how they figure out what they're going to create for each episode, for each character, the wigs, the detail, that's all in that Neptune in Pisces. We also see the music that is created for the dance, the ball scenes. This is also Pisces. And so it's very interesting to see that because in terms of skilled craftsmen that are behind the scenes, that's very much your Mercury in Capricorn that are on these deadlines and timelines. But it's in a North Node. It's kind of how it's kind of going out in the world. It's another way that is layered into the actual show itself and how we perceive that. So I also think the Neptune at 18 degrees of Pisces, 18 degrees of Pisces was a very specific degree and sign that I was speaking to when I was doing the season 3 Bridgerton details between Luke's character and Nicola's character. Their characters, Penelope and Colin, but it's more that the translation of the Pisces energy leaks that happened in season 3 as we approached, I think, the June 13th drop of that release date and the events that happened. That is also present in this information. It's kind of like the accident that happened that was not something that they could have planned for, but definitely had an impact on how people perceived season 3 because of the real world partner showing up in the unexpected way. I think it would be after they did the red carpet and kind of that after effect. But it hit the airwaves in terms of social media and all these things by the paparazzi showing up and how then that was picked up and really disappointed lots of fans at the time. Interesting, I think it is in Luke's chart, not Luke Thompson, but Luke Newton's chart, that he has 18 degrees of Pisces so prominent in his chart, but also Nicola Coughlan. They both have 18 degrees Pisces as this point in their chart. And so that Neptune shows up as something that rippled through the collective related to those two actors. That's also in this and also shows kind of like that point where that release of energy would come through and having the kind of the mistake that would happen in terms of the PR of the show. So that is also very interesting to look at. Also, the Neptune, just in the overall romantic theme for the genre. right? That's kind of the work that they're doing. They're serving the female audience, or even the mixed audience, a heavy female, of course, when it first came out. And I think over time it has emerged as more. And so I think it's fun to take a look at that, and how Neptune in Pisces was such a key planetary position in 2020 when it first came out, and how that kind of ripples through the rest of the seasons as well. And especially in season 4 for the ultimate, which is like the Cinderella kind of theme. So that's fun to take a look at as well. So that is the Pisces. Also for season 4, at the launch of season 4, there were 2 planets in the second part. So part 2 of season 4, we had Saturn and Neptune leaving Pisces and making their conjunction just a couple of days before the season 4 drop. Pardon the sun, it's in the eyes here. I'm trying to get away from the camera. So the season 4 part 2 has Saturn and Neptune in Aries, and it's important to kind of take into consideration that it really did have like this new chapter that is kind of initiating for the rest of like season 5, 6, and so forth for Bridgerton, because with the Saturn and Neptune coming by transit to that point in the chart, it's kind of emphasizing kind of another kind of section of time, kind of looking at the show in new what it as a romantic genre. And it was really emphasized by Luke Thompson and Yaron Ha in what they did for season 4. So you can see in this detail how each of the other seasons are participating. Anyway, going back to the kind of the final details of what season 1 was for us in terms of what it would, have a ripple effect through the other seasons, is season 4 marked the change point for what might emerge in seasons 5, 6, and 7, and maybe 8. I don't know how many more they got. I think they definitely have Francesca or Eloise, Francesca, and the 2 younger children, Gregory and Hyacinth. So it'll be interesting to see how those all play out. But this is definitely kind of this arcing point and looking at the romantic genre. So I think it's been fun to kind of explore the themes of season 1. What do you think? I always find it fun to kind of, what, if you've studied some astrology or what you've picked up on, what themes you also, if I've missed any that you think are important to point out, share in the comments below, because it's fun to kind of explore these, what these arts bring to us as a collective. And we're looking at, a finished piece of work. And so season 1, when it came out, what it offered us as a collective, and, definitely what I appreciated it during that period of time, because it was such a reprieve to have the age of Aquarius. The cast ensemble is the kind of the core of it, but also the inclusivity of it and all of that. And just that it's just incredibly well written and fun. It's really fun to watch. And I think everybody, that's why they enjoy it. It's kind of a nice escape when there's such a quality of life that we have been enduring for 6 years, I think, because of changes in what has happened from a pandemic to economy to things on the global stage politically and what is happening in the world. It is nice to have a reprieve to go to just kind of put the real world aside for a moment. I mean, that's why I appreciate the arts. And I think somewhere, I don't know who it was a political leader who spoke of like, why do we fight for certain things? And one of it is to have the arts. We fight for things like this, to have the arts, to go out to the theater, to have those things that are about our culture, are about us, reflected back to us through the arts. And that's how we understand ourselves better with clarity, but also how we might be able to bring out emotion. Things can get stuck because we get stuck in a place and time because of how difficult it was for us to move through it. But the arts allow us to contemplate and resurface things that need to be felt or could be understood in a new way with a new lens. And that's the wonderful thing about the arts. So I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into Bridgerton season 1. And next time we'll be taking a look at season 2 and what the chart for season 2 can tell us about that particular season. And I get to rewatch season 2 now, so I can refresh the highlights and pull those out. But let's look at, just if you're interested in a reading, or also the community that I've created, Astro Sages. I've got 2 places you can find that here through the QR codes. But I appreciate each and every one of you for sharing comments and liking or subscribing to the channel. It really helps me grow and share my love of the arts and astrology with those that are interested in things like Bridgerton and other shows that I'll be doing. And have a great rest of your week, and take care.